She broke the window with a swing like she was trying to hit a home run, but instead of a baseball, she got a laser dot on her chest and the sound of a rifle bolt clicking into place. I hadn't used the old M24 since Afghanistan, but when a woman in a pink tracksuit kicks down your door with a metal bat screaming about HOA jurisdiction, you don't grab the welcome mat, you grab the scope. That's the thing about people like Karen. They think retired means soft. They think rancher means harmless. They don't realize some of us retired because we did enough damage already. I was willing to live quietly. But she came looking for a war. And I'm very good at war. The morning had started like any other. I fed the horses, brewed coffee thick enough to strip paint, and walked the fence line with Ranger, my Belgian Malinois who understood hand signals better than most humans. The Arizona sun was already baking the dirt by 8 a.m., and the sky was a flawless sheet of blue. It was supposed to be peaceful. That's why I bought the land in the first place. 40 acres of quiet, no neighbors within screaming distance, and definitely no one telling me how high my flagpole could be. But peace never lasts when an HOA is involved. Especially not when Karen is the one running it. It started a few weeks ago. I got a letter with a gold foil HOA seal claiming I owed fines for non-compliant exterior decor and inappropriate fencing structure. The letter ended with, "Failure to address these violations will result in escalation." I nearly spit coffee through my nose. My land wasn't even inside the HOA's jurisdiction. I checked with the county records myself when I bought it. I thought it was a mistake. Then I got another letter. And another. Then came the enforcement photos. A couple grainy shots taken from a distance that showed my American flag, my solar panels, and me in a lawn chair with binoculars. That last one ticked me off. Someone had been watching me. I installed perimeter alarms that night and began tracking footprints along the southern fence. That's when I knew it wasn't just Karen trying to flex. She was obsessed. I could have gone to the sheriff. But I didn't want to make it official. Not yet. Part of me wanted to see how far she'd go. It was curiosity mixed with a bad habit I picked up in the military. Don't react until you're sure what you're dealing with. Let the enemy reveal themselves first. That night, the barn was quiet. I was tinkering with an old engine block, the radio playing soft country in the background. Ranger lay in the corner, half asleep, until his ears shot up. I felt it too, something in the air changed. Attention. I killed the lights and stepped into the shadows. The sound of crunching gravel came first. Then a loud thud. The shattering of a rear window. I didn't hesitate. I moved like I'd trained to silent, smooth focus. Through the glass, I saw her. Karen. Pink tracksuit. Big sunglasses even though it was night. And in her hands, a baseball bat. She didn't knock. She screamed something about code violations and community authority, and then stomped inside, swinging the bat like she was on a demolition crew. Ranger stayed by my leg, perfectly still. I raised the rifle just enough to send a red dot dancing across her chest. She froze. Now, I'm not a violent man. Not anymore. But I know how to control a situation. I stepped out of the shadows and said, calm as morning, "You've got 3 seconds to explain why you just broke into my home with a weapon. Start talking." Karen shrieked. Not like a scared person, but like a toddler who didn't get a toy. She dropped the bat and started shouting about her authority, how my flagpole was triggering to the HOA board, and how she was going to forcibly correct violations. I didn't say a word. Just flipped the switch that locked the barn door behind her and activated the infrared cameras. She didn't know it, but she had just stepped into a full surveillance zone. Every second of her tantrum was being streamed to my laptop, recorded in HD, and backed up on 3 drives. I leaned back against the wall while she tried to pry the door open, kicking and screaming that I was in violation of community order. I let her yell for a while. Then I hit the intercom. "Karen, you broke into my home with a weapon. You're being recorded. The sheriff is en route. You can keep screaming, or you can sit down and wait." She turned beet red, tried to swing at the camera with her purse, and promptly slipped on a patch of oil. Ranger barked once, mockingly, if I had to guess. I couldn't help but chuckle. Not because it was funny, but because this woman thought she was the one in control. She came onto a sniper's land, and she thought she was the predator. 15 minutes later, the sheriff arrived. He was a good man, used to dealing with drunk cowboys and ATV accidents, not crazed HOA zealots in matching tracksuit. He took one look at the footage, one look at Karen smeared with oil and rage, and sighed like a man who knew his paperwork just quadrupled. He cuffed her gently, ignoring her protests about community authority, and led her out. "We'll sort it out downtown," he said. "This ain't HOA jurisdiction. This is trespassing. And possibly attempted assault." She looked at me as they loaded her into the cruiser. "You'll regret this," she shouted. I just smiled. "You already do." That night, I sat back on my porch, dog at my feet, rifle back in the safe. I thought it was over. But with people like Karen, one defeat only feeds their delusion. I didn't know it yet, but this was just the first shot. And Karen wasn't retreating. She was regrouping. 3 days after the break-in, the dust had barely settled before I noticed the surveillance drone. It wasn't military grade, just one of those hobbyist quadcopters, but it was persistent, hovering like a lazy vulture right above my north pasture. At first, I figured it was some nosy neighbor trying to get a glimpse of the incident that had already hit local news. But when the same drone came back the next morning, buzzing lower and deliberately tilting toward my solar panel array, I knew exactly whose hands were on the controller. Karen wasn't done. She was just getting warmed up. I considered shooting it down. The old instinct kicked in again, calculating wind, velocity, angle. But I let it go. It was better to document than destroy. I let Ranger follow it with his eyes, and I followed it with my trail cams. Every pass it made was stored and timestamped. I even attached a temporary tracker on one of my barn antennas, just in case they were trying to scan my signal. Call it overkill if you want, but when you've spent years identifying hostile tech in the dark with lives on the line, a buzzing drone over your ranch isn't something you ignore. Later that afternoon, I drove into town for supplies. When I pulled back into the driveway, I saw the first sign. Literally. A bright orange notice of violation was zip-tied to my fence. According to the bold, blocky letters, I was being cited for unauthorized livestock activity, unapproved fencing materials, and refusal to cooperate with community leadership. It was laughable. I wasn't under HOA jurisdiction, and they knew it. But seeing it printed, mounted like some sort of legal decree, sent my blood boiling. What made it worse was the small sticker on the corner of the sign, HOA Enforcement Unit, a name Karen had likely invented while sipping boxed wine in her overpriced kitchen. I ripped it down, tossed it in the fire pit, and sat down to review my surveillance footage. I found the timestamp. Around 1:42 p.m., 2 HOA goons, mid-50s, matching blue polos, one of them wearing knee braces and trying to act tactical, walked onto my property, passed the private property sign, and hung the notice like they were posting an eviction. I watched one of them take a selfie in front of it. That night, I didn't sleep. I planned. By morning, I had 3 more fake violations on my mailbox, including one that claimed my American flag violated the approved color scheme for visual aesthetics. Ranger growled as I opened it. Inside the envelope was a letter signed by Karen herself, threatening to fine me $200 per day until I voluntarily complied with community guidelines. I had half a mind to march into that neighborhood and hold a seminar titled Jurisdiction 101. But I knew better. Karen wanted a fight. She wanted me to act out so she could twist the story again. So I did what I do best. I went invisible. I reached out to a friend named Eli, former cyber intel, now a semi-retired security consultant who owed me a favor. Within 24 hours, we had a custom setup installed, motion sensors linked to silent alarms, trail cams with thermal lenses, and a network of low-light cameras disguised as fence posts and bird feeders. I even mounted a directional mic on the west field, aimed right at the path Karen's people had used to sneak in. Every step they took from now on would be recorded. But I wasn't just setting up surveillance. I needed witnesses. That's when Miss Linda came back into the picture. She showed up with a peach cobbler in one hand and a thick binder in the other. "Thought you could use dessert and dirt," she said. Turned out, Miss Linda wasn't just a nice neighbor. She was a former NSA analyst with an absolute treasure trove of collected audio logs, emails, and neighborhood chat transcripts. She had proof Karen had been forging HOA notices and using board funds for personal expenses. Linda had been collecting for months, waiting for someone strong enough to push back. We sat on my porch and went through the data like two agents on an op ranger kept watch near the fence while we cataloged every dirty move Karen had made. What we found was more absurd than I expected. Karen had hired a compliance squad, paid them through shell invoices, and had been using HOA maintenance funds to install Wi-Fi cameras aimed at houses she disliked. One folder was even labeled "Coal Problem." "She's trying to provoke you into making a mistake," Linda said. "Then she can claim you're a threat and push the sheriff to issue a restraining order. Maybe even force a court case." I nodded, thinking of the drone, the staged violations, the fake citations. It was all bait. She wanted a reaction. Well, she was going to get one. Just not the one she expected. That weekend, I put on a little show. I opened the gates wide and started repainting my barn fence in full view of the street, wearing a "Don't Tread on Me" shirt just to twist the knife. I planted American flags every 10 feet across my property line and installed a massive, solar-powered LED display near the road that flashed "Private Property, Not HOA Land" in bold letters, all legally within my rights. Sure enough, Karen came cruising by in her beige SUV. I caught her on camera slowing down to take pictures, jaw clenched tight. Later that night, her minions showed up again. This time, they tried to remove one of the signs. Too bad they didn't notice the infrared sensors. The moment they crossed the boundary, floodlights came on. A piercing siren blared across the pasture. Ranger barked from the shadows. The speakers played pre-recorded warning messages on a loop. "You are trespassing. Law enforcement has been notified." They panicked. One dropped his clipboard and ran into the cactus line. The other tripped over a low wire and face-planted into the dirt. I watched from the porch, drink in hand, as they scrambled back to their car and peeled off. The next morning, I received a letter slid under my gate. It wasn't typed. It wasn't even official. Just a handwritten note that said, "You're escalating this. You'll regret it." That's when I realized this wasn't about zoning, fences, or flags anymore. Karen had made it personal. She wasn't trying to enforce rules. She was trying to conquer. But what she didn't know, what she could never understand, was that I've fought real enemies. I've faced ambushes in the mountains, survived snipers, raids, and backstabbing politicians. And now she was playing general in a HOA uniform, waging war against someone trained to win at all costs. She wanted a battlefield. I was about to give her one. 2 nights after the siren incident, things got quiet. Too quiet. No drones, no bogus citations, no HOA foot soldiers pacing the perimeter. That was the most dangerous part. Anyone with real combat experience knows silence isn't peace. It's the inhale before the strike. I didn't relax. I prepared. Around midnight, I ran a sweep of the ranch. Nothing unusual except for a set of new tire tracks near the south fence. I logged it, reviewed the feed, and found a 15-second gap in camera footage. Just a blip. But blips don't happen in my system. Unless someone tampered with it. I checked the camera myself. Sure enough, the wiring had been clipped, cleanly, professionally. Not Karen. Someone she hired. That was when I upgraded from surveillance to full deterrent mode. I rigged decoy motion detectors near my barn and set them to alert only if tripped in a specific sequence. That would let me know if someone was probing the perimeter instead of just wandering by. I placed glass marbles in the gravel at key access points. They crunch in a very specific way if stepped on. No one hears it but me and Ranger. It's an old trick from my forward operations days, and it's never failed me. I wasn't waiting for them to strike again. I was inviting them to. At 3:14 a.m., the sensor on the west side chirped. Not a false alarm. I opened the live feed on my tablet and saw two silhouettes crouching by my horse pen. They were in dark clothes, no lights, no sound. The lead one held a crowbar. I recognized him. Doug. HOA board member. Former security guard who failed the police academy twice and still walked around like he had a badge. The other guy was unfamiliar. Taller, stockier, probably the muscle Karen hired since her own militia flopped so hard. They weren't there to talk. They were there to destroy something. Probably the solar panels or the flagpole, maybe even the barn. But they didn't know I was already in position. I had slipped out of the back door minutes after the alert. Ranger was at my heel. We circled to the high ground behind the storage shed. I had clear line of sight and, thanks to the moonlight, perfect visual clarity. I didn't need to use my rifle. I didn't even unholster my sidearm. All I had to do was activate the audio protocol I'd set up earlier. My old squad's voice training tapes. Shouts in Arabic, rapid-fire commands, radio static blasted from hidden speakers. It wasn't English. It was chaos. Doug froze, confused. The other man reached for his belt. Then came Ranger. From the shadows, my dog launched forward like a rocket. Not to bite, he's trained better than that. Just to intimidate. He growled, lunged, and cornered the big guy between the fence and a trough. The man shrieked. Doug bolted. I stepped out from the shed, holding a flashlight under my chin and shining it dead into Doug's eyes. Drop the crowbar, Doug. He squinted, breathing heavy. You can't do this. This is community enforcement. I took 2 steps forward. You're on private land. With tools. At 3 a.m. And cameras have caught every second of this little mission. You're insane, he muttered. No, I said. I'm patient. And now I'm done being patient. They fled. Literally tripping over each other. Ranger barked once and trotted back to my side, tail wagging like it was all just a game. I watched them stumble into their truck and vanish into the night. But I wasn't satisfied with chasing them off. It was time to go on offense. The next morning, I called a contact from my reserve days. Grant. Now a private investigator with state-level access and a gift for digging through HOA financial record. I gave him a summary. By lunch, he called back. Your Karen's been very naughty, he said. She used HOA dues to pay a private security firm 2 towns over. Disguised the payments as landscaping contract. Company name is just a P.O. box. Total scam. It didn't surprise me. But it gave me ammunition. I compiled a packet with photos, documents, audio recordings, and 3 separate witness statements from neighbors who saw Karen ordering men to shut that vet up. I delivered copies to the sheriff's department, the county clerk, and, just to spice things up, a local journalist who ran a blog on small-town corruption. I didn't sign my name. Just mailed it in with a sticky note that said, "She picked the wrong sniper." The article dropped the following Thursday. Local HOA under fire for fraud, harassment, and private security scheme. Karen's smug face from the HOA website was front and center. Within hours, it was on Facebook, Nextdoor, and even the local news channel. People were furious. Comments flooded in. Residents began demanding emergency board elections. 2 board members resigned that night. But Karen? She doubled down. Always does. She showed up at my ranch again, this time flanked by a man in a suit claiming to be a property appraiser. She tried to smile, to act civil, like nothing had happened. She waved and said, "We're just reviewing some easement lines, Cole. No harm." I didn't say a word. I let Ranger stand next to me, silent, staring. I stood with my arms crossed, not blinking. The appraiser looked nervous. He knew something was off. Karen kept talking, pretending to laugh, pretending this was routine. Until the sheriff's SUV rolled up behind them. Deputy Morales stepped out, glanced at me, and then at Karen. "You two were asked not to come near this property," Morales said calmly. "There's an ongoing investigation." Karen lost her cool. "He's dangerous. He has weapons. He's a threat to our whole community." Morales looked at me, then back at her. "Ma'am, the only threat we've seen so far is you. You broke into his house. Your board hired thugs to vandalize his land. You've already been warned." She tried again. "This is harassment. I'm the victim." Morales looked back at the appraiser, who was already backing away toward his car. "Sir, I suggest you leave now before this turns into a legal issue for your company." Karen stood there fuming. I didn't say a word. I just watched as she finally turned and stomped away, her SUV throwing dust clouds as it tore off down the road. I didn't feel relief. Not yet. Because with people like her, you don't get peace. You get pauses. And in those pauses they plan. So I planned too. Because Karen thought she was the queen of this little suburban kingdom. But I wasn't her subject. I was the storm that was coming. I should have known Karen wasn't going to fold just because her fake militia fell apart and the sheriff warned her off my land. The thing about people like her is that they don't back down, they regroup, refuel, and then lash out harder with whatever power they can dig up. She'd already tried breaking in, surveillance, sabotage, and legal threats. All of it had failed. So now she went for something lower. Dirtier. Psychological warfare. It started with the letters. Not mailed. Just placed. Folded pages, slipped under my gate in plain white envelopes, written in childish block letters with no return address. The first one just said, "We're watching you." The second said, "You'll pay for humiliating our leader." The third, oddly enough, just had a drawing, crude stick figures of me and Ranger in what looked like a fire. I'd seen this kind of intimidation before in worse places, on worse nights, in lands far from here. But there was something infuriating about it happening on my own ranch, in the country I'd fought for. Still, I didn't react publicly. That's what they wanted. Instead, I upgraded my game. I installed discreet wildlife cameras along the outer road, invisible unless you knew where to look. They weren't just motion-triggered. They streamed directly to a cloud backup I could access from anywhere. I wanted faces, plates, voices. Because whoever was helping Karen now wasn't just obnoxious. They were starting to feel dangerous. That night, I walked the pasture with Ranger. The stars overhead were bright, the kind of clarity you only get out in the desert miles from city lights. But my peace was short-lived. Ranger froze by the west fence, his ears pointed. Then I saw it, a slow, orange flicker. Fire. I ran. A small blaze had started at the base of my hay barn, spreading quickly. Someone had tossed an ignited cloth through a side panel. It didn't explode, but it burned just enough to catch the hay. I grabbed the hose and fought the flames while Ranger barked and paced. I got it under control before the whole structure went up, but the smell of scorched earth and wet ash hung in the air. The camera caught it, a figure in a hoodie, sprinting off before the fire flared. I paused the footage on their shoes, neon green laces. Then I checked the footage from the outer trail cam. Bingo. License plate. And clearer than that, Karen's SUV parked just off the road with the lights off, engine running. I called Morales. The deputy came out within the hour, took one look at the footage, and didn't even need to ask questions. "We're done playing games," he said, voice tired but firm. "You're lucky you caught it early. We're elevating this." By morning, Karen was being investigated for conspiracy to commit arson. The one who lit the fire? Her nephew. A college dropout living in her basement who'd bragged online about community cleansing. He'd posted memes about dealing with traitors to the HOA, not realizing that screenshots are forever. But here's where the twist hit. While Morales worked on charges, Linda, the sharp retired NSA neighbor, uncovered something else. Karen had been using her position on the HOA board to pull property maps and ownership documents. Not just mine, but surrounding lots. She was trying to forge a petition to expand HOA boundaries illegally, claiming that my ranch had once belonged to a housing developer who failed to mark it correctly in their system. She was rewriting history to give herself power. I couldn't believe the audacity. She knew I wasn't in the HOA. She knew the county records were clear. But she was building her own alternate version of reality and dragging innocent people into it. I'd underestimated her capacity for delusion. I went to the courthouse and met with the county registrar. After I showed them what Karen was doing, they agreed to do a formal audit of the HOA's filings. That's when the dominoes started to fall. First came the discovery of financial fraud. Karen had authorized dozens of improvement contracts that funneled HOA money into shell companies, including one owned by her ex-husband's cousin. Landscaping, security upgrades, parking lot lights, none of it ever happened. But the invoices were paid. And the checks? All signed by her. Then came the anonymous tip to the state attorney general's office. I didn't submit it. But I know who did. Linda's email skills are legendary. Within a week, Karen was under investigation not just locally, but at the state level for HOA embezzlement, harassment, and even misuse of public grant funds meant for community safety programs. It should have ended there. But Karen still had one last meltdown left in her. A week after the fire, during a special HOA meeting, Karen stood up in front of a half-filled room and ranted for 15 full minutes. Someone live-streamed it to Facebook. She screamed about traitors, accused half the board of being co-opted by military fascists, and even name-dropped me as a domestic insurgent training dogs to kill civilians. It was so unhinged the sheriff's office used it as evidence of mental instability. The video went viral overnight. The comments section tore her apart. Memes exploded across Reddit. One showed Karen's face photoshopped onto a general's uniform with the caption, Operation HOA Storm. Another showed her SUV being chased by a giant tactical dog labeled Ranger. It was petty. It was hilarious. But it was also damning. That night, a patrol car pulled up in front of her house. I watched from a distance as Morales walked her out in handcuffs. She wasn't screaming this time. Just quiet. Like she'd finally realized the battle was lost. The very next day, the remaining HOA board members held an emergency vote. Karen was expelled. Her name was scrubbed from the HOA website, and a public apology letter was issued to the residents of the neighborhood. They promised reforms, a fresh election, and an end to unauthorized enforcement actions. It should have felt like victory. But standing out on my porch, I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt tired. Tired that it had to go this far. Tired that someone so entitled, so consumed with control, could hijack a system and weaponize it against innocent people. I sat down with Ranger beside me and watched the sun set over the desert hills. It was quiet again. Truly quiet. The kind of silence I had craved when I first bought this land. The silence I earned. Karen had wanted to make me fold. Instead, she made me focus. But something told me the final chapter hadn't quite been written yet. Because when you shine a spotlight on one tyrant, you sometimes find others hiding in the shadows. 2 weeks after Karen's arrest, the town started breathing again. For the first time in months, there were no strange vehicles idling near my ranch gates, no drones buzzing over the property, and no flyers stuffed in my mailbox about community violations. It was like a switch had been flipped. Quiet returned. The kind of quiet that doesn't feel like tension building, but actual, hard-earned peace. Ranger picked up on it before I did. He wasn't pacing the porch as much anymore. He didn't perk up at every distant engine growl. He'd just sit next to me in the evenings, his ears relaxed, eyes half closed, finally at ease. What was left of the HOA board issued a statement saying they were undergoing a full restructuring and external audit. Translation: they were covering their tracks and hoping to avoid lawsuit. But the damage was done. The residents who had blindly supported Karen were now the loudest ones calling for reform. People who had stayed silent while she escalated her personal vendetta were suddenly very interested in transparency, accountability, and community unity. Typical. The sheriff's department thanked me quietly. No fanfare. Just Morales dropping by with a handshake and a few words. "Glad you kept your cool." A lot of folks wouldn't have. I nodded, accepted the gesture, and left it at that. There was nothing to celebrate. The whole thing never should have happened in the first place. But there was one thing that did lift the mood. It started with a knock at the gate on a Sunday morning. I looked through the monitor and saw a small group of kids from the neighborhood standing awkwardly, holding a wooden plaque. Their parents stood nearby, all of them looking nervous, like they weren't sure if I'd come out or chase them off with a broom. I opened the gate, walked down, and saw the sign, "Thank you for protecting our community from your quiet friends." It was carved by hand, with little horse drawings and American flags, and one kid had drawn Ranger wearing a cape. I didn't say much. Just thanked them, nodded to the parents, and carried the plaque inside. But it hit me harder than I expected. Because for all the nonsense, for all the chaos Karen unleashed, there were still people in this town who understood what I stood for. Not control. Not power. Just safety. Boundaries. Peace. I mounted the plaque on my barn wall that night. As for Karen, the legal process was slow but steady. Her nephew pled guilty to attempted arson, accepted a plea deal, and moved back in with his parents across state lines. Karen herself faced charges for fraud, harassment, and conspiracy. Her lawyers tried everything, from blaming stress-induced delusion to suggesting she was misled by others. None of it worked. Too much evidence. Too many witnesses. Too many viral clips that painted her as a delusional tyrant in a pastel tracksuit. Eventually, the court ordered her into psychiatric evaluation and house arrest pending trial. Ironically, she was banned from any HOA involvement for life. And just like that, the tyrant who wanted to rule over everything couldn't even leave her own porch. I thought that would be the end. But then came the final twist. One I never saw coming. A realtor stopped by my property one afternoon, asking if I was interested in selling. I laughed and told him no, and he nodded like he expected that. But before he left, he mentioned that Karen's house had just been listed. And the buyer? A federal judge. A woman named Elena, originally from D.C., now transferring to Arizona for a quieter life. She specifically requested a property far from HOA drama, and, according to the realtor, she had read the entire Karen saga online. Apparently, she thought being my neighbor would guarantee some peace and security. 2 weeks later, she moved in. First day, she walked up with a basket of cinnamon rolls and a firm handshake. Told me she didn't like nosy people, loud parties, or micromanagement. Told me she kept a 9mm in her nightstand and a federal badge in her drawer. I couldn't help but laugh. "You'll fit right in," I said. Ranger liked her instantly. And that dog's a better judge of character than most humans I've met. After that, things settled for real. The ranch thrived. The fences stayed up, the cameras stayed quiet, and the sunrises felt like they used to, just light breaking over the desert with no threat in the shadows. But I didn't forget what happened. I kept every file, every camera, every report, because people like Karen are never alone. There's always another one. Another little tyrant who thinks rules are for others. Another person who believes authority is a weapon, not a responsibility. The difference now is that I'm ready. I've already fought that war once. And I know exactly how to handle it if it comes again. Late one evening, I stood by the edge of the property, watching the wind roll through the grass. A truck drove by slowly. Not suspicious, just someone getting home. But I watched it until it disappeared. Not because I was paranoid. Just aware. That's what people like me do. We notice things. We prepare. And when trouble comes knocking, we don't run. We open the door with steady hands and a quiet warning. Because this is my land. My line. My peace. And I will protect it. Not with anger. Not with revenge. Just with the calm certainty of a man who knows exactly what he's capable of. And that is more than enough.